It all started with a very simple idea. Tell the stories of how successful middle market CEOs made it to the corner office. I'm Brant Handley, founder and managing director of Resource Options International, or ROI. We're the USA's premier executive search firm focused exclusively on empowering middle market companies to attract, hire, and retain A players while transforming top executives' careers and lives. ROI's Into the Corner office is dedicated to discovering how middle market CEOs advance their career, and we're making these remarkable and sometimes quite unbelievable stories available to you for the very first time. Listen and learn about the challenges they've overcome, the interesting people they've met along the way, and the lessons learned that steered these executives' unique journey into a middle market corner office of their own. I know you enjoy these CEO stories as much as I've enjoyed recording them, so thank you for listening today. And if you like what you've heard, rate us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm looking forward to you joining me on the next great middle market CEO adventure into the corner office. My guest today is David Collum, Chief Executive Officer at the Pocket Testament League. David has a passion to see people meet Jesus and get to know God. Why? Because for years he was one of those guys who tried to follow all the rules, do everything right, and even had some success. But in the end, his focus on being right led him to actually behave as if he was always right. He was not so much fun to be around, and God in his mercy let things fall apart and then met him in his brokenness. He's been fortunate to work in corporate America, with his last position leading an organization that cared for the nuclear power plants of our nation's fleet of nuclear submarines. He had the privilege of working with the church as a full-time pastor for 12 years. And today, as Chief Executive Officer of the Pocket Testament League, he gets to lead this global movement of Christ followers who are sharing Jesus in his own words. David Collum, welcome into the corner office.
Hey, it's great to be here, Brent. Thanks for having me.
Oh, wonderful to have you. And gosh, we're just a little over 3 months into this COVID crisis. This podcast, of course, will release a little later than that. But how have you been holding up? I know that we'll talk a minute about how your business has been booming. One of those things that we certainly would deem as essential, particularly in our faith walk. But tell me a little bit about how you and your family and your colleagues are doing at the Pocket Testament League.
Well, thanks for that question. Yeah. So first of all, myself and my family, and in fact, our team, we're a pretty small team, folks are healthy. So I certainly have friends, I imagine you do, who are been directly affected by this. So we've, by God's grace, been doing well. So that's good. We certainly miss family. My kids live up in the Boston area. I'm in New York, so lots of Zoom calls watching watching my granddaughter grow before my eyes. So but all in all, compared to what lots of people are facing, we're doing really well.
That's awesome. Well, I'm glad to hear about that, and we'll get into the wonderful work you're doing at the Pocket Testament League a little later in the podcast. But we'd like to start in your early years and hear a little bit about where you grew up and, what your early family life was like. Tell us about your parents, brothers and sisters, and, some of the things that happened in your youth.
Sure. So I'm a native New Yorker, and I've lived in New York my entire life, never in the city. So I grew up on the what we call the East End of Long Island. It's in a town called Southampton. My dad owned his own business. He was a guy who made signs, lettered trucks, outdoor all sorts of advertising. So and so I knew what it's like to grow up in a house where you're with an entrepreneur, somebody who was driving hard. And I grew up on the ocean and on the bay, so the water was just a huge part of my life.
Brothers and sisters, or
yep, I've got I'm the youngest of four. I've got two older sisters and an older brother.
Right.
So
a lot of sailing, a lot of beach time, I suppose.
A lot of beach time, and my dad was an avid fisherman. So ask him to reel in the fishing line so we could go water skiing was always a sacrifice on his part, but he would do it. Yeah,
that's great. And mom worked in the home raising the kids, or was she also involved in the business?
So yeah, she was ostensibly worked in the home and raised us, but family business. So she did the books, and I can remember all these little lessons that you have. I remember we had the same extension. This is back in the day before you had mobile phones, right? The business number and the house phone number was the same. I remember telling my dad, why do you always answer the phone? Saturday at 9 o'clock at night or something, and he'd say, David, because you never know when it's going to stop ringing.
That's right.
Right. He grew
Yeah,
up through the
so true.
Depression. So,
Yeah,
he was always driving hard.
appreciative. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And appreciative of business.
that's
Yeah. And so
awesome.
she kept the books. She was the accountant and kind of a classic small family business model. Yep.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, David, you and I met through the C12 group. And for those of you that are listening, don't know about C12, it's a peer advisory group of Christian business owners globally. I think we're breaching 2,700 members, if I'm not mistaken. I think we got over 100 chapters. Wonderful organization. I've been involved. I think I'm going into my fourth year. And David, I think you've been involved at least that long. And you're a member of the New Jersey group, and I'm up here in Connecticut. And we met recently, actually through Zoom calls, right? Because one of the things that has been an advantage during these COVIDian times is we've been able to connect broadly and more frequently with a lot of folks and in our traditions. But tell me a little bit about, first, growing up, or was it a Christian family? Was there faith in the home? And, what led you initially or ultimately to joining C12?
Yeah. Well, thanks for letting me tell this story. So I grew up in a home that was centered around the church. I grew up in a Roman Catholic home. So I went
Mm,
to Roman Catholic parochial school. I was an altar server.
wow.
So the church was a big part of who we were. But I didn't meet Jesus until I was 30. So it's
Interesting.
just, yeah,
Yeah.
it was amazing. And so I went to college, and I was one of those guys that went to church on Sunday in college. I can remember being really angry when I came to know Christ at 30. I went and saw my Roman Catholic priest and said, "Why is it I did not know this?" And I was
Wow.
but yeah, I went through a personal crisis. Was having great success in the corporate world, but no peace at home. And
Mm,
I knew my life was falling apart. And I turned to an employee. At that point, I was managing a nuclear power plant. I turned to
wow.
one of my managers, and I said, he was the same age as I was.
Hmm,
He had two sons. I have two sons. They're the exact same age.
wow.
And I turned to him and I was like, "How do you do this, man?" And he said, "How do you do what?" I was like, "How do you manage all the stress, all the demands that we have, right?" Because he works in the same place I do.
Sure.
In fact, he had a boss who was kind of a jerk, me. Um, so, and the guy always knocked it out of the park. He was excellent at his
Wow.
job. He managed
Wow.
he managed the entire training program, did
Mm,
a great job, and he was unrattled. He had peace. So I said, "How do you?" And
wow.
I said, "That's what I want. I want to have the peace that you have." He goes, "Oh, that." And then he looked at me and he goes, "Do you really want to know?" And
Really?
and I'm in an airport, and I'm in the Pittsburgh airport with him. We're stuck for weather,
Mm.
and I said, "Yeah, I want to know." And he looked at me and he said, "Yeah, I don't think you do." And
Whoa.
so
Talk about the tease.
well, see, you're a sales guy, so
Exactly.
you think he's raising the buying temperatures. Like, John was a mechanical engineer from Alfred University. There was not a sales bone in his body.
Interesting.
He was counting the cost because he knew
Yeah.
that, he kind of knew who I was Monday through
Hmm.
Saturday.
Hmm. Hmm.
He knew I went to church on Sunday. He also knew I would run over people in the parking lot if they were not. As you leave church on Sundays, like, could you please get out of the way because I want to
Yeah.
go watch my football game,
Oh my gosh.
So that kind of a guy, and he had to tell me I didn't have a clue. And he introduced me to
Mm.
Jesus that night, and
Wow.
that was the beginning of my journey. And so you fast forward all the way. That's when I'm 30. You fast forward almost 30 years later, almost 3 decades later,
Yeah.
and I find these businesses ministry groups. I find C12, I find Convene, I find Truth at Work. I'm like,
Mm.
who are these people? And then it
Yeah.
dawns on me. I was like, okay, I did not turn to, my priest, great guy, didn't turn to him when I was in crisis. I turned to somebody in the workplace who was what? Who was excellent at their
Yeah.
job and their
Yeah.
life.
Yeah. Had
Because,
balance. Yeah.
yeah, that person had credibility. I was like, okay,
Yeah.
I want what they want. So I love the
That's
idea
awesome.
of C12. I love the idea of uh, really, because I'm a product of this,
Right.
the
Right.
the the
Yeah.
the
You found
power.
it in the workplace, which is
Yeah,
pretty awesome.
yeah, the
Yeah.
powerful witness that people, they're struggling with their own lives, trying to work it out, but following
Yeah.
the Lord, the powerful witness they have. So yeah, that's how.
That is so
um
cool. Thank you for sharing
yeah,
that. No,
yeah.
it's a great journey, and I want to take a couple of steps back because leading up to that. But wow, what a testimony, for C12 and other organizations that really do talk and make examples of work, faith in the workplace.
Hmm.
Because I'll tell you, I was the same. I was a closet Christian for many many years. It really kept that separation of church and state seriously, and business. And much to my chagrin, you don't have any regrets looking back. But, this podcast has really been a ministry for me too. And I hope that whoever's listening, can hear that story and say, take a look at those folks that are you're working around you and those that may have peace that you don't, and ask the question, David. That's a wonderful story. But rewinding a little bit back, where you said you grew up in parochial schools. The Jesuits are known for obviously great education. Were you a good student there, or did you find that challenging?
Yeah, so I went up through eighth grade. I was a good student, and then kind of went into the public school system for high school, just because of which schools were available and whatnot. So yeah, I generally was a good student. I played football and ran track one year and wrestled one year.
Nice.
And also I was a scout my entire life, a Boy Scout.
Okay.
So so I'm an
Did you make it to Eagle?
I'm an Eagle Scout. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Oh, once an Eagle Scout, always an Eagle Scout.
Absolutely. There's three things in life you always are. You're always an Eagle Scout, you're always a Marine, and you're always a Rockette. I have rarely met
strange bedfellows.
I have rarely met somebody who meets all three of those criteria.
I love it. That's great. So a little bit of sports outside of school. What about entrepreneurial things? Did you do any of that growing up? Was there, stuff on the weekends that you earn the extra spending money and so forth, or, save towards college?
Yeah, so probably two stories there. So first of all, the east end of Long Island, especially when I was growing up, was basically a summer destination.
Right.
So
the Hamptons are famous, of course, globally.
And,
right?
and so if you're out there, you make your money between Memorial Day and Labor Day. You got 100 days to do it. And so now that's changed a little bit with transportation. But so I would find old bicycles. And I would repair them, and I'd put them in front of my house, and I'd rent them for $5 a day or something.
Oh,
and because people would pedal. I lived a half mile from the ocean, so people would pedal. The village was very close to the ocean, and so I rented these bikes and would fix them up, and that was my little entrepreneurial business. It actually, the guy who ran the local bike shop actually realized that I actually taught myself how to fix bikes, so he hired me. So I did that part time, and then I did that part time. And then I actually started, again, in addition to his business, he also had a second business, which was he always had something else going on. He had a laundromat. Oh. And so before, you're allowed to work at age 11, I started working. I remember my parents sent me on vacation when I was 13 years old. They sent me on vacation because they figured I was working too much. Now, my wife laughs hysterically about that. She goes, "That certainly explains a lot about you, David." So then your parents have to send you away to stop working. Because she just asked me this morning. She goes, "Do you think you could take a couple of days off?" I was like, "Yeah, I guess I could think about that."
Yeah, maybe in July or August. Right?
Yeah. My C12 chair, who's going to be listening to this, I'm sure I'll get feedback on it. But anyway, yeah. So we did entrepreneurial things, but worked worked through
high school.
Worked at the same. In addition to doing the bikes, I also worked for the same hardware store for 6 years, and I can remember two great stories. I remember I was a stock boy, right? So you'd put out all the stuff on display and have all the boxes. So you put all the boxes back together, which are empty, and you carry them up into the attic, which is a huge flight of stairs. And of course, the boxes are empty. So I would go through this elaborate stacking process of smallest to biggest to smallest. I'd have like a stack that was 6 feet high. And it weighed, 2 pounds or something. It was just empty cardboard. And I would carry it up the stairs. I remember Sam Herrick looking at me saying, "David, a lazy man's load is never an easy one." And I would make it about 80% of the way up those stairs before the boxes would all start falling down.
Oh my God.
And he just looked at me, he goes, "I'm not saying it twice, son."
You got to get that message.
So yeah. And then I remember one time, again, I was really, really young, and I'm helping some people because the store's crazy busy, and I'm helping this guy buy a hedge trimmer. And it was kind of a rude customer. And the boss walks by, and this guy stops, interrupts me, grabs the boss, and goes, "You're the boss." And basically asks the guy, he goes, "Look, I'm talking to this young kid who doesn't know anything about hedge trimmers. So which hedge trimmer should I buy?" And the guy looks at me and goes, "That kid knows more about hedge trimmers than I do. You should buy the one he recommends." And walks away.
Walks away. And this is the owner.
This is the owner. This is the owner.
This
is the owner.
And David,
I got to tell you, I thought to myself, that's look, I'm 60 some odd years old, still stuck with me. And I remember
moment.
Yeah. And that's, when you're leading people.
Yeah. Right.
That's just a great lesson.
That's right.
Great lesson.
Did the guy buy the hedge trimmer you recommended?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
You would have been a fool not to.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, what did you squirrel your money away for? Were there certain vices you had during those years? Was it kind of a foregone conclusion you go to college and need to save for that, eventuality, or,
Yeah.
you know,
So yeah, I grew up in the days when you could certificate of deposit, a CD actually had an interest rate
that's
attached to
right.
it, right? So
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
my
10% or 8 to 10%, I
yeah.
remember those days,
So
right?
so my goal was, my freshman year in high school, my goal was to earn enough money, put a CD away
Mm,
at the end of that summer so it would mature when I was a freshman in college and do that for 4 years. And so my goal was to make sure that I had spending money
nice.
when I was in college.
Yeah. And
Um,
did older brothers and sisters go to college? Was that kind of expected of you growing up?
So it was my parents' great dream. So
Yeah.
I'm one of
Right.
four. And so, again, my father being the kind of business guy that he is, he would buy a piece of property for each kid.
Hmm.
At the east end of Long Island in the 1950s, that's a smart
That
thing
was a
to
good
do.
investment.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and he would, when we go to college, he'd want to sell that. And so out of the four of us, we all four of us started college and two of us finished it. The other two got pretty close. Um, I went to the United States Merchant Marine
Yeah,
Academy,
I
which is
saw that in your background.
one of
Yeah.
five federal academies, right? So, um, so f- the U.S. government paid for my education, but
Now, was
yeah,
that a choice because of your love of water and so forth, or what was the motivation behind going to the Merchant Marine?
yeah. So I applied to both the Naval Academy and the Merchant Marine Academy. Was accepted, got nominations to both, and I have two brother-in-laws that
Hmm. Hmm.
are Annapolis grads, and really was inspired by those
Hmm.
folks. Very much drawn to um, just that kind of an organizational structure.
Right. Right.
Really wanted to do that. And the Merchant Marine Academy, I can remember one of my brother-in-laws calling me up and saying, "So you want to be a four-star admiral and do this for 40 years?" And I go, "I'm 18. I'm not quite sure." He goes,
That's a possibility.
he said, look, because he said, unless you really know you want to do that,
Yeah.
if you want to do that, definitely go to Annapolis. It makes a big difference. But if you're not quite sure, you know, when you graduate from Merchant Marine Academy, you can go active duty Navy, active duty
Mm,
Marines, Coast Guard, or Reserve.
yeah.
Um, some advice and counsel from a guy
Yeah.
who was an officer in the Navy and had gone through Annapolis and whatnot. So yeah,
So what did you do straight out of the Merchant Marine?
I went and worked for the company that for 25 years. It was called the Knowles Atomic Power Laboratory. Parent company was General Electric for about half of that time,
Okay.
then Lockheed Martin. But
Right.
basically, the lab designs nuclear reactors and power plant systems for our nation's aircraft carriers and
Wow.
submarines, and then trains the sailors that operate them. So
Yeah. Wow.
called a prime contractor in government language. We're a prime contractor, and they would two or three things happened. So first of all, I got married right out of uh, when I graduated from college. Pretty
Right.
typical thing. And when you go to the Merchant Marine Academy, you actually sail. So I've spent a year at sea. You spend six
Mm,
months sophomore year and 6 months junior year at sea. You and one other kid basically on a merchant ship.
wow.
Um, and so
Where did you go? What part of the world?
Oh gosh, I went to Leningrad when it was Leningrad in
Oh my gosh.
1978.
Yeah.
So I went to the North Atlantic run up to Leningrad. I did a west coast of South America all the way down to Chile,
Hmm.
and then I did South Africa and East Africa, three different voyages. Yeah,
Fantastic.
yeah,
Wow. Wow.
yeah. It was amazing learning experience, all on different ships. And the old adage, "The attitude of the captain is the attitude of the ship," is so true. It
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
amazing. Three different
Yeah.
ships, three different captains, three
Three
different.
different cultures.
Yeah,
I can imagine.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. So,
Did you have leadership responsibilities during that time, or were you just, basically a deckhand, so to speak,
so when you're
sailor?
at sea,
Yeah.
you're the midshipman or the cadet, which means you are the low man on the
You're the
totem
low
pole.
man. Right. Right. Right.
When you're back at the academy, you have different responsibilities,
Of
and they
course.
have an entire leadership structure. So
Yeah.
had different roles when I was at the academy in
Got
terms
it.
of leadership
Got
training.
it.
Yeah.
And then your first employer, I assume they recruited straight out of the Merchant Marine Academy, right? That was probably a prime hunting ground for them. Did they actually place you there, or were there, choices of different opportunities? What made you decide to go in that direction?
Yeah, they placed us there very specifically
Right.
because really interesting contracting strategies. So the government contracted with, at that time, General Electric to run this laboratory
Okay.
and to train Navy sailors. So picture this
Right.
crew. There's three civilians. There's one officer and then there's like 40 to 50 enlisted men who
Right.
are nuclear trained, experienced, back from sea, and a couple hundred people that are 19 years old that you're training to operate nuclear reactors. And they structured it that way because
Wow.
General Electric was liable to run that power plant, a
Of
land-based
course.
nuclear power plant, properly. So they wanted to hire people who understood kind of a military ethos, because you were actually in charge of the technical training of these Navy guys.
Right.
So you showed
Right.
up with your
Right.
haircut. You showed up with your
Yeah.
haircut. You know,
Right.
you kind of knew
You
that.
had a uniform. If it wasn't,
Yeah. Yeah.
a specific naval uniform, I'm sure it was a dress code, right?
Yeah, and you just kind of understood what those guys were
Yeah.
facing, and you just learned a lot. I learned a lot. I was very influenced by naval officers, chief, and also non-commissioned officers, chief petty officers, senior chief petty officers. Learned a lot about leadership, a lot about people. You know, for the people that we were training, they were very young. They were 19 years old. It was the first time they really weren't on a base. They kind of came up to Saratoga and found an apartment and had their brand new bonus, which they turned into a fast car, usually red,
usually a muscle car, right?
Yeah. And so just one of I can remember this Master Chief, tall guy, Master Chief Stepsinski, and I remember he would knock on the doors of the kids that were behind, and they'd come out and they probably had been drinking the night before, and he'd look at them and say, "Smith, I see you're behind in whatever subject. I'm going to be at my desk in 15 minutes. I expect I'll see you there, right, son?" And so just this tough as nails guy.
Yeah.
But he figured out, we had a kid that was failing out, and he had done really well before he came to us, and he figured out that the kid couldn't read.
Oh, wow.
And that kid had such a good memory that he could memorize books and memorize what people wrote on a chalkboard or whatever. And when they got to us, it was like, here's the manual, read the manual, go trace the systems out. When you're ready, go get.
He couldn't do it.
Go get an oral exam for each system. And we had the brightest young men and women. But part of the process that they went through with us was they had to learn the plant, but they also had to learn how to teach themselves.
Right.
Because they were going to show up in a crew, not a training program. They're just going to merge into a crew, and they've got here's the manuals, go get yourself qualified. Yeah. So we figured out the kid couldn't read. We contacted the local Literacy Volunteers of America people. Kid learned how to read like in record time, and rolled him back a class. The next class he graduates number 1. And I just am like, man, it's one of my, I just like that guy to be able to see the potential in that individual and just knew something was amiss
and invested in him.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
It's just, so great stories.
Do you remember the first time you started managing people, David?
Well, I can remember being a scout leader.
It goes way back.
And there was more about it, but in some ways it was like, people wanted to do stuff. Even as scouts, it's like, we need somebody to organize the trip, right? So a lot about leadership is
stepping up. Yeah.
Can you clear a path, remove obstacles so people can, go down the path or the runway and be successful? So I think a lot of that early training had to do with that.
And when did that kick in the workplace? Did they put you immediately into situations where you were managing some of the cadets there at the nuclear installation, or when did you?
Yes, the short answer is yes. The image I have is, the old Revolutionary War, the way the guys fought, like there'd be these lines of people, and guys would
with
come
the muskets up,
and they would kneel down and shoot at each other, and then people would fall down, and the next line would kneel down. So I was promoted very rapidly, and I say not a little bit sarcastically, but because there were people ahead of me that were failing at a very high rate. I was at a college at 22, and at 24, I was in charge of a crew operating a nuclear power plant, had authority of, within parameters, had authority to start up and shut down a nuclear power plant.
Wow, that's pretty awesome.
And
pretty young age.
I remember it was like, hey, we need you to do this for way too young. I need you to do this for 6 weeks. Because then we'll get some things fixed, and we'll get some people in here that have got more ability.
Right.
18 months later,
you're still doing the job.
18 months later, I was promoted to be a manager.
Wow.
And
that's awesome.
Here's what I learned from that. I learned that you're always following somebody.
Yeah. Right.
Unless you're an entrepreneur starting up something from nothing, you're always following somebody. And so we had a plant manager who was brilliant, but he managed all the details himself. And he'd call you up at 2 a.m. in the morning and he would ask you detailed questions. He'd make you get up and go check some crazy thing in the plant.
Right.
And then he would give you permission.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so he basically had the capacity and the energy to run the plant 24 hours a day from wherever he was. And he
Wow.
did for 2 years because everybody had a 2-year assignment. They brought the next guy in who basically assumed that we had been trained, knew how to make decisions, and would make correct decisions. And so you didn't get those calls at 3 a.m.
Right. Right.
And
Right.
man, did we fail. We
Yeah.
failed. And so he had and we all bought his vision. We all liked him. We all wanted to be successful, but we did not have the strength to do that. And in part, it was because of the culture he inherited and his failure to appreciate that culture. And so whenever I go into an organization, I've been in lots of different organizations. I always think, so who am I following?
Yeah. Right.
Who am I?
Right.
And those people didn't show up every day trying to mess up the organization. They showed up trying to be successful, but they did it in a way that created all the folks that you're leading. So
yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, David, you eventually decided to go back and get a couple of degrees. You've got a master's in theology. You did an MBA as well. Tell me a little bit about where that kind of fit into your career path, and what were some of the decisions around going back for those additional degrees?
Yeah, so thanks for that. So there was a time when I really wanted to climb the corporate ladder. That was before I came to know Christ. I was, all that success when you're 24 and 25 and 26.
Pre-30, right? This is all pre-30.
And of course, this is the 80s, right? So I mean, think about what the inflation rates were. I mean, you would get pay raises. The percentage pay raises you would get were ridiculous.
That's right. Yeah.
And so you actually start believing that stuff about yourself. That's the danger. You actually start thinking, man, I'm pretty good. Maybe I could probably be chairman I could probably be CEO of General Electric. Yeah. Right. I mean, and today I look back and go, what a ridiculous thought that you have in your
head. First, that you'd even want it, let alone that you could be selected for it. Right?
People listen to me and say, man, this guy was really clueless. And so I went and wanted an MBA versus a technical degree. I really was learning that I liked leading people and was kind of bucking the trend. I didn't want to become the next PhD nuclear scientist. I really I loved seeing organizations accomplish things. It just was a great excitement for me. So that was one degree. But then when I came to Christ when I was 30, it's kind of scales fall from your eye and you realize, man, I am just completely I'm messed up here. So my marriage failed. As I came to Christ, my wife announced that she wanted a divorce and she left. And I started realizing that I was living for the wrong stuff. And came to faith, got to a good church, and started seeing all these guys who were generally the same age I was, roughly, kind of doing the same stuff I was doing, which was we weren't out drinking, we weren't out carousing, we weren't out trying to, being unfaithful to our wives. But I got to tell you, we were 60, 70, 80, 90 hours a week in the office.
Right.
And no peace, miserable. I'm like, these guys are on the same road I was on. They're going to lose their kids. They're going to lose their marriage. And so got very involved in men's ministry. That was during the Promise Keeper kind of ascendancy. And just really
this is in the 90s, David.
This is the early 90s. Yeah. And so over time, I continued, God by his grace, I continued to have great corporate success. Became a vice president in our company and whatnot. And so, but I remember the morning I was in the shower thinking about our men's ministry meeting that night. And at that time, I had the position where I got to lead the organization that, kind of kept track of all the nuclear reactors of all the submarines that were operating. And so I'm thinking about, and I had dawn, it's like, David, this is not what you're supposed to be thinking about.
Yeah.
There are men and women that count on us doing our job properly for our nation's defense. But my passion was just going towards ministry. And so I kind of followed that and went and got a theology degree, resigned at 47 from my company and became a pastor for 12 years. Yeah, I went and did that for 12 years and worked in the church.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, your trajectory has been really for the last about 12, 13 years, right? Involved in a number of different ministries. You were a rector for a while. You were obviously the dean at the Cathedral of All Saints, and that led up, of course, eventually to your current job. But just tell us a little bit about kind of the decision making around that. I mean, that was a pretty big shift at almost 50 years old to be able to say, I'm gonna shed the old man, so to speak, of this corporate career and really focus. Took a pretty good dose of faith, I think, to make that step. Tell us a little bit about your decision making then.
Yeah. So the first thing I did wrong was I came to my wife and said, I've been praying about becoming a pastor, and God's really been telling me that. And she said, and I said, oh, by the way, I've been talking to Derek about that. She goes, Derek, our pastor? I was like, yeah. So then she said, so how long have you been praying about this? How long have you been talking to Derek?
Mm,
And I was like, about 9 months, maybe a year. So she goes,
mm.
really? And you didn't think you might want to bring that up to me sooner? So she just looks at me like, you got to be kidding me.
Right,
So
right.
uh, the backstory there was her father used to give out her phone number to seminary students. So she made sure she hired somebody who wasn't a pastor. She went and hired a nuclear engineer from General Electric. So anyway,
Right.
but the process there was one of the phrase I use is I wanted to move towards it because it was such a big deal. So I said, let
Yeah.
me just go take some courses. Let me understand what this is. Take some night. I went to night school. People say, what seminary did you
Mm,
go to? I went to night school, and then online and all that kind of stuff. So
right,
just
right,
kept moving towards it, and got ordained and was an assistant pastor, which kind of meant I did nights and weekends.
right.
And it was in that process where that was me trying to manage God. I thought I'm going to keep my day job, you know, make the nice salary, and I'll just kind of do this stuff on the side. And
Yeah, yeah.
about 4 months into that, I was putting on weight. I was at home. I was like, I'm working.
Mm,
I am right back to where I was
mm,
before I was 30. That cost me my first marriage. This cannot be what God wants.
right.
And so we kind of moved towards that, and then circumstances and things accelerated to where it just became really obvious that um, it was time for us to go.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it was a big deal. It was a big deal. It was a radical change to our life. And yet at the same time, we just knew it was the right thing to do.
Yeah, yeah. A
Yeah.
lot of prayer, I'm sure, a lot of
Yeah.
consultation with others,
hmm
probably a lot of reading of the good book and helping with your guidance on that.
It was a ramp, right, versus a
Yeah,
cliff. It was a
yeah,
ramp. It
right,
was a
exactly.
ramp versus a
Yeah,
cliff
little
because
parallel pathing there for a
yeah.
while,
So
and
here,
yeah,
so
yeah,
so in the middle of that, right, here's one of the decisions, right? One of the decisions is where am I going to go to seminary? And I really wanted to go to a good seminary.
mm,
And my parents and my wife's parents were in their 70s and 80s, and they all lived in New York.
right,
And there were not seminaries in New York we're going to go to. So,
yeah, yeah,
and she said, I don't think God would ask us to leave our parents at this point in their life,
yeah,
and
yeah,
that was just gold.
yeah,
And
right.
so I was
There
like,
you go.
okay, you're absolutely right. So I can do this. I can go online. I got to work a lot harder and read a lot more, but I can do that so that we can honor our father and mother. And
Mm,
so there was kind of like just taking what's the next decision I've got to make versus, what's the 5-year plan. So that's kind of how we approached it.
that's awesome. Yeah, I've heard it said that the voice of our wives can sometimes be the closest thing to the voice of God we'll ever hear. At least while we're on this plane.
Well, yeah. So,
Not that we always listen,
yeah,
right?
I was going
But
to say, don't tell my wife that, man.
well, she's going to listen to this,
Come
David, so
on.
she will hear it. Well, tell us a little bit about the Pocket Testament League. Gosh, you've been CEO there for almost 4 years, and
Mhm.
and for those that are listening that don't know much about your mission, give us a little taste of what you folks do.
Yeah, great. Thanks for asking. So, look, our why we exist, what we think about when we wake up in the morning, what we think about when we're going to bed at night is how can more people come to meet Jesus Christ?
Right.
That's what gets us energized.
Yeah.
How we go about doing that is we invite people to read the Word of God.
Mm,
So, Ravi Zacharias, a great apologist, just passed. I know
mm,
probably we've all listened to him, and he's just amazing. That's not how we do it. What we do is we invite people to read specifically the Gospel of John, and
mm,
the way we go about that is we ask average everyday Christians to basically do three things. The first is to read God's Word every day, just to be in God's Word every day, which pastors ask us to do that. Secondly, to take a pocket-sized Gospel of John, pick it up, and say a prayer in the morning before. Say, Lord, who would you have me give this to today? And put it in your pocket or put it in your purse, and we call that carry. So read, carry, and the third step is share it. When you come across somebody and the Holy Spirit nudges you to, I'll give them that gospel, and the Holy Spirit nudges you to, I'll give them that gospel, just offer them that gospel words you might have. So the words I use, Brand, are I say, hey, I've got this, the message of this book changed my life. I just would like to share it with you. It's a gift.
Yeah. Why the Gospel of John?
Yeah, great question. So we have 4 reasons that we do that. First of all, John writes in his gospel, these things are written so that you might have life. That's point 1. So John specifically wrote his gospel, specifically structured it with 7 signs so that people of a different culture, the Greek culture, would be able to meet Jesus. The second is John's gospel. We live in a soundbite world, right? And so if you think about John's gospel, by verse 14, you will hear, but to all who did believe, he gave power to become children of God, born not of man or the will of man, but of God, right? That's by verse 14, you've heard that there is a God. Jesus is God, that he's come to earth. I mean, think about what happens in those first 14 verses. And so it gets right to the point very quickly. And then it takes people on this ascending series of miracles, culminating in the very resurrection of our Lord. So it's structured in a way where you would walk people through this meet the person of Jesus. The other reason we say is that it actually speaks to different cultures. So this gets a little bit philosophical, but when you say in the beginning, just those 3 words, in the beginning was the word, right? That's how the gospel begins. In the beginning, you're making a huge philosophical statement. You and I accept that the Big Bang is scientific fact, but for centuries, people believed that the universe was always here.
Right.
So that wasn't challenged until the early 20th century when people began measuring waves and could see the universe expanding.
Right.
And for the first 20 years of the Big Bang Theory, when it was running around as a theory among scientists, they resisted it. Because if there's a beginning, you get into the philosophical realm of causation.
Right.
If something began, who began it? And if you figure out who began that, then who began that? You're in this endless thing that you have to get back to something that is eternal.
Yeah.
Right. And the Gospel of John says, in the beginning was the Word, which is kind of this abstract concept, and then gets all the way to, and the Word's actually a person. And oh, by the way, that person came to earth. So it's a huge philosophical statement.
Yeah,
so
beautiful.
Those are just some of the reasons that we use it.
Awesome.
Other, and most people, when they hand a Bible, they don't say start in Genesis. They normally say read the Gospel of John, if you think about it.
Right. Awesome. So, one of the things that really inspired me to invite you on the show, David, and I think it was the first or the second time we met in one of our Zoom meetings with the various C12 was your perspective, or I guess the fact, not a perspective, that the increase in demand has just skyrocketed during the COVIDian time, so to speak. And if I recall, it was something like 5x. Tell us a little bit about that and how your ministry has grown, particularly during these times when people really are seeking out the answers.
Yeah, thanks for that. So if we go back to this simple method that we kind of paraphrase as read, carry, share, if you think about that, that is a repeatable process that you can train anybody to do, right? This is just a repeatable process that's scalable.
Yeah.
Right. So we're in the business of trying to mobilize followers of Jesus to invite people, and most of those followers have a real pain point, and that is they don't know how to do it. They're embarrassed. The culture says be quiet about your faith. All those things, right?
Keep it in the closet.
Yeah, all that kind of stuff. Right? And we're here to say, hey, look, we get that you love Jesus. We get that you have a burden for the lost, and we understand your pain. And we have a simple, repeatable process that can get you through your pain. Right? That's pretty much what we do with folks. Well, the pain level goes up when you see people dying. When there's a global pandemic, right? The old thing of when you're trying to change your behavior, you've got to overcome your resistance to change. To overcome your resistance to change, you need a big enough vision, compelling vision, to do whatever it's going to take to get through the barriers or the obstacles. So what we've seen is this as you say, these COVIDian times, we've seen people who have a heart for the lost. Those hearts are beating faster and louder, and so they're looking for ways to reach the lost. That's kind of so the environment is there for us. That's the people who want to share.
Right.
On the other side, people who I want to say most like people in North America, they weren't hostile to Christianity. I mean, some people are hostile to Christianity, but most people were living a fine life. Unemployment's low. They've got jobs. Things are fine. I'm in control. I don't need God. Thanks for this, but you just keep your religion to yourself. Well, their world's completely rocked.
Absolutely.
Right. So they're now the people who were, I don't want to say hostile, but people who maybe were neutral or disinterested now are looking for hope. They're scared. Right. And so you've got kind of this perfect storm of folks who maybe were reluctant to share but wanted to. They're now feeling more urgency to share, and you've got increased receptivity. So that's kind of the environment that we're in, which is a great environment for us. And so what we're seeing is just amazing things. So we pivoted and did some digital stuff. We have a digital PDF gospel that you can just text message to your friend, right? And so we've been saying, hey, text messages to your friend. And my suggested text message is, hey, I know you think I'm a Jesus nut, but could we read this together? And I promise I won't argue with you. Kind of like, that's just because that's what.
I'll go on mute.
Absolutely. And so we're seeing an average person who uses a digital sharing, they're up to, on average, sharing it 150 times.
Wow.
Okay.
That's incredible.
Because everybody's locked in their homes, or everybody's bored or whatever. Hey, can we just read this together and talk? I promise not to argue. We have one ministry that serves food boxes. It's a really cool ministry. They're out of Lancaster, Pennsylvania, called Blessings of Hope. And what they do is they take excess food from farmers, and then they ship it to people in need. And so they were doing about 50,000, feeding about 50,000 families, I think a quarter. And in every food box, they would put a Gospel of John, because they wanted people to receive food and also to have an opportunity to receive some hope. So then COVID hits. So the state of Pennsylvania calls them up and says, can you do 100,000 boxes?
Wow.
Like in a month versus a quarter, 50,000 in a quarter. So they call us up and we're like, let's get after this, man. Come on, this is cool.
That was a challenge.
So when they did their second 100,000,
oh my gosh,
I said to them, I was like, can we just talk numbers? Because God wants us to be good business people. How many are you going to do? Because if I start shaving a couple cents per gospel in print costs, because we just show them what the print costs are, and we just want to cover the print costs. That's how we operate. And so, we just ordered 1 million.
Oh my gosh!
So think about that, 50,000 to 1 million. And
David, that's what a blessing, man.
And here was the decision. It's like, should we order 1 million or 2 million? Because we're gonna do 2. And I said, look, the price point between 1 million and 2 point, we're not getting. Let's conserve cash. We'll do 1 million at a time, because it gives us because we're just not going to get that great the savings. We've already harvested all the savings. And the reason they're doing 1 million is because the federal government went to them. The USDA is watching farmers dump food. Right, and they're like, this is nuts,
this
right?
Is crazy.
This is nuts. We're dumping food, and we got people who need food. Who can broker this together? So there's a Christian ministry broker that's basically provided this conduit. They have to come up with shipping costs and whatnot, and so we get to be there with them.
And you're right along with that.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh,
so
Dave,
2 examples, right?
Awesome.
Individual members who are doing digital sharing 100 to 150 times, and then we have organizations, and we're seeing lots of organizations that are realizing at this time. Even like C12 companies. One of my great C12 stories is I got a guy who does stuff, and he what he provides we would generally call a capital expense, right? New project, new structure, new stuff. Well, capital expenses is one of the first things most people put on hold.
Gets cut,
because we're not sure if our business is growing, what's going to happen. Let's wait a few months, right? So lots of his business is on hold. So he wrote to his top 70 customers, personal letter, talked just about how his faith was more important to him. Nothing crazy, nothing like, you're a sinner going to go to hell or anything like that. Just like, just like my faith's really important to me. It's really based on the person of Jesus. And I just want to include this gospel and share it with you. That's what he did, right?
Fantastic.
And so,
Wow.
And getting great feedback from people. People were really moved. Like, you'd actually write me a letter, not about, please give me your business, but like, things are really hard right now. I want to make sure I'm caring about you, and let me just share this with you. Very relational,
Awesome.
So it's cool stuff. Yeah.
Well, David, we're just about out of time, and this has just been a tremendous journey. We always ask one question at the end, and I'm going to put a little twist on it today because your journey is just so amazing, given that you spent pretty much half your career in the corporate sector, and of course, came to Jesus midlife. What career and life advice would you give to someone who, like you, perhaps has, been exposed to the church early on, but has had these doubts about whether or not, they should be doing something that's maybe more core to their faith, or, maybe living faith more out in the marketplace? What would you tell them? How would you go about advising someone who's maybe, listening today and kind of going through that? Wow, I really want to demonstrate my faith a lot more in the workplace.
Yeah, so I think the answer I'd give to that question is don't confuse your job with your identity. So, you talked about the fact that I was an Eagle Scout, and yeah, that's something I accomplished, but I actually thought of myself as an Eagle Scout, right? That became my identity. I went to a federal military academy, which really does a very good job of indoctrinating you into who you are. I worked for the General Electric Corporation.
Yeah.
When we had a family quilt patch made, the GE symbol was on it. Okay. Like, wow. I had to have a tattoo removed from, I won't tell you where. So, but seriously, it wasn't until that moment when I was 30 that said, David, all those things are great, but that's not who you are.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think as you aspire to certain things, just know your identity is, found in the person of God, that you're a child of God. And I think if you can do that, then you're going to keep yourself anchored, and whatever he puts before you in whatever aspect, I think is critical. And I'll tell you, even I had to learn that lesson again when I became a pastor. I'd gone through that at age 30 and learned that lesson, and I fell into that hole again when I was a pastor. Oh, pastor, oh, pastor, oh, pastor, right? You start thinking your first name's Pastor.
It gets to your head,
yeah. So that's my 2 cents there.
Well, David, thank you so much. Chief Executive Officer of the Pocket Testament League, David Collum. We really appreciate you sharing your journey into the corner office.
Thanks, Brent.
Thank you for listening to Into the Corner Office with Brant Handley. We hope you enjoyed hearing our guest CEO story as much as we did. If you want to hear more CEOs reveal their journey into the corner office, please subscribe via iTunes and tell your friends and colleagues. For more information about Brant, Resource Options International, and the mighty middle market, visit www.goforroi.com. We look forward to having you join us for our next episode.